So basically, there was a black male adult looking into a vehicle. So I'm gonna try to avoid the acronyms actually. And when you see that at 11 o'clock at night for a police officer, that does look suspicious. Now, doesn't mean he's a bad guy or anything like that. Doesn't mean it's someone that's going to break into a car. No, but we are going to do our due diligence and drive in there. So I drove into the lot and I introduced myself basically at a good distance, rolled down the window from my car from the opposite side and said, "Sir, how you doing?" You know, what I wanted him to see me, look at me, get exhausted, just I don't care how he reacted, but he was going to leave. That's how usually cop work happens if you're really doing your job. So when I went there, he sees me, he looks at me, looks in the air, and just stays like that. Doesn't even want to interact with me, just becomes indifferent. And for me, I'm not going to engage him. He saw me. So that's when I drove away and just stood post and hopefully he left. I didn't see him anymore from a distance. So as I drove off to head to 7-Eleven, that's when I saw the subject run across the street in, towards the hotel that they told me to make sure he doesn't get to. And that's when I had to make the call. And I made that U-turn to come around and make contact with him again, and you're gonna probably have to ask some questions, Sean, because I'm gonna kind of roll through this. And that's when I put out the call where I'm at and let them know that the possible suspects here, but I'm just gonna make contact. So I get out of the car. He's walking my direction, and I'm walking towards him. And I tell him, "Sir, San Diego Harbor Police, I need to talk to you." And he just keeps talking. He just keeps walking towards me. And as he gets closer, I knew he wasn't gonna just move, so I moved. So once I moved, he walked past me, and I had to make that decision again. Do I just let him leave? I couldn't. I had to make sure if this is someone that's a threat, or if this is someone who has no respect for police officers or anything, any authority, that to me, that kind of gets to me. I had to at least follow him and talk to him. So I was following him and I said, "Sir, you're gonna have to stop." And thinking my partners are arriving, right? And as he slows down, he puts his hands into his pockets. And that's when, for me, as a defensive tactics instructor, that's something you don't do. That's a threat to me. So once he put his hands in his pockets, that's when I grabbed his elbows and I just held him there. I said, "Sir, you're gonna have to stop. San Diego Harbor Police." And I was already trained to identify myself. And so I just held it there. What I didn't anticipate was his was the way I didn't anticipate how angry he was going to get. And I remember he just started to flinch up and then he just spun right into me. Like, you know, we're face to face. And I'm looking at him. He looks down at my holster and then he grabs it with two guns. He starts trying to pull it out. That's when I just automatically just start grabbing his wrist. And that's when the dance, I call it the dance. That's when we started to basically struggle with each other throughout our interaction with each other. And I remember telling him, "Bro, you gotta let go, bro. You gotta let go."
He's trying to get
And
the gu- he's trying to disarm you.
he's trying to take the gun out of the holster. Yeah, and I'm trying to keep that hand because I don't trust my level two. Level two is basically click click, right? I didn't trust that the gun was in, so I just made sure that hand was in. That he's holding on to my two. His two hands holding on to my holster. I mean, to the gun was stuck in there, and then we just started to go around, and that's when I just tried to tell him, "Bro, let go." And it got to the point where he was just. I could still smell him to this day. I could still feel his anger, his rage. And then he jumps on. He basically jumps onto my waist with his two knees, and he just yells and he just tries to leverages the gun out. And that's when my vest comes up. That's when my belt, separates from the Velcro, and the gun is basically up here. And for me personally, I was like, you know what? There's the more I hold them, the more it feels like it's coming out. So I decided to just go to the floor and just try to hit his head onto the ground. And so I jumped, and as we went to the ground, what I didn't anticipate, my hands were not going to let go of his wrist. So the first thing that hit the deck was eventually my head. And I remember just hitting the deck, and I could see stars. Um, but my hands were still on the wrist. And then next thing you know, we're looking at each other face to face like this, and he's just grunting and he's pulling, and the gun is actually almost at my face now, and my vest is like up here, it's out of place, and he's just aggressively pulling out. And that's when we started. I call it the washing machine, where we just started flipping over each other, just keep going back and forth. I didn't want to let go of that wrist, and nor did he want to stop from trying to pull it out. And it got to the point where eventually he started to tire out a little, and I was able to stay within his legs on the ground. So I was in between his legs. You get a picture of that. His back is on the floor, and I'm looking down at his chest, and I could hear him breathing. So I just stuck my forehead into his sternum and still held down his wrist, and I spread out my legs, and I just stayed there. And I had to make a decision. I had my backup knife right here. Should I shank him, or should I just get on the radio? And I felt like I was in control. So I got on the radio and I put out cover now, which means basically I need help, guys. I need help now. And I just let go of the radio, and I can hear dispatch calling units out, and I can hear sirens from afar. And that's when I felt, okay, I think I'm going to be okay. I think I'm going to be okay. So I just stood ground. I could hear him still trying to grunt it out. Next thing you know, he takes one arm off, one hand off it, and I have two hands on one wrist of his wrist. And this time I feel really secure now. I don't care what you do. You can hit me all you want. So he was like trying to bang me in the head. I just held everything in. And then next thing you know, things went black. Things just went total black. Um,
He hit you in the temple.
he hit me all over, all over. He was trying to knock me out or something, just trying to do something where he can at least get released from me. Because it looked like at that point, sometimes it feels like it didn't. He didn't want the weapon no more. He just wanted to get away. But because I was stuck into him, and because he was exhausted, that's when he started to realize, okay, he's not gonna be able to get the gun out. So he just started banging on my head. But to me at that time, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel anything. I felt good. As someone who's trained in boxing and what have you, that I was just covering up like that. He was hitting the top of my head, so it was
You,
not doing anything.
you said things went black for you though.
That's where I'm getting at right now.
Okay.
So what happened? He actually brailled my belt. He found my taser holder. He felt that the handle. He pulls it out, and that's when he put it against my head in the back right here, and that's when he proceeded tasing me. And
He
that's when I went
tased
out.
you in the back of the head.
He tased me in the back of the head, and because it was against my head, the doors weren't able to open. So if it doesn't open, it doesn't start that 5 second circulation. That means it does 5 seconds, but it'll continue to do the 5 seconds. And according to investigations, it went over 40 seconds that I was stuck there. And that's when I went black. That's when I went, I guess, unconscious at that time. And the reason why it's important, because you talk about mental illness, that's where the trauma really occurred. Because in that blackness was just me and a black world. But I was still conscious. I was like, where am I? And that's when I started thinking, am I dead? And if I am, I actually felt good, because the part I didn't explain through all that with him, that was probably the most fearful I've ever been in my life. And going through that, and then all of a sudden things were just black, was a bit peaceful for me. But then images of my wife and my two boys start to to show, and then a fourth figure of like an overexposed body. But it started to show. So my wife, my oldest, my youngest, and that fourth figure, my wife. And the more I saw that, the more I started to realize, oh, something's not right here. I'm still here. And then I start to hear like the movie reels, da 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 da, like it was flickering. These images are flickering. And next thing you know, my eyes open, and I could see his abdomen, and I could see the road, and then I can hear a taser machine. I could hear the tasing gun just click, 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 and it was a tasing sound. That was that. That was a I was basically, it felt like I was watching a movie reel, but it was actually the taser sound that was just flickering, flickering, flickering. And when knowing that that was there, that's when I started to try to move, and I could not move. I was incapacitated. So I could not move. I couldn't even yell. I couldn't even move my mouth. And that's when true fear that it's tough for me to articulate really start to set in my heart, my soul, and my mind. It was fear mixed with shame because I felt like I let my wife down, and I felt like I left my sons down. And the fact that I thought that I was gonna die, and I failed my family was something. It's really, even to this day, it's tough to really to write down or even explain to people unless you've really been there. And that's when it start. That's when I start to give up because I start to really settle in and say, okay, he got me, checkmate. So I thought he was going to take the gun and then place it to my temple and take a shot. And all I could think about was how I failed my wife, how I failed her, and how my boys, in those split seconds, I couldn't believe I was like thinking like that. And then something just kicked. Something kicked in me that is like, oh, hold up. I've been tased before numerous times. I've been through trainings where I've been cattle pronged before in the neck. I could get out. And even though I couldn't move, it was those images that to me personally really started to, I needed to get home. That's what started to get to me. And in order for me to do that, that's when I had to dig this rage I never, I never thought of or felt in my life. And it was a rage where I am going to kill this guy. I'm going to drink his blood. I'm going to take this guy apart. And I'm going to do everything I can because he's trying to take me away from my family. And I can't believe you did. And I just started to think like that. And I just started thinking of my boys. They love USC. And I just started saying, fight, fight, fight. And I start yelling that internally. And even to the point where I was like, my body started to convulge. If I can get my hand to touch his elbow and I can use my body to hit it, I know I have a chance in order to release it. So through all that, and I remember yelling internally, and I felt like a ball of like a volcano that was about to explode. And that's when I just went all raged out, and I was able to touch something. I don't know what it was. And I remember just yelling internally, and I hit it, and that's when the taser separated from the neck, opened up, and the two prongs went there each way. And I do remember looking at him, and I just punched him in the chest, and I came up, and I don't remember how it came to be, but my gun was up here at my head, and I looked at him, and I just center mashed right into him. It wasn't till I know seconds earlier, I wanted to literally kill this guy, but to see him look at me from the floor, he had this look of like bewilderment, and he didn't have a weapon on him. I just could not shoot. So I looked at him and I said, get down. He looks to the ground, and I see the taser there. He looks at the taser, and he starts to walk up towards me. And that's when I felt, this is it. I'm not even going to mess with this guy. And I felt like this line that he crossed. And that's when I center massed Sean and took one shot. And he goes to the ground. He goes to the deck. He tries to get back up. And I look at him again. I said, stay down. And this time I knew I was going to do a double shot to the head. Um, if he tries to get up one more time. And I remember getting off position. He looks up, he tries to get up, and I'm about to do a double tap. And all of a sudden, the blood starts spitting out of his chest. And it was like spitting out all over the street. He looks at it, he looks at me, he puts his hands down, and he lays on his back. That's when I put out shots fired, shots fired. Got down, took out my knife, ripped up his shirt, and started proceeding with CPR. Um, and that's when finally one person came behind me, grabbed my shoulder, and it happened to be my boy, um, Sammy. And he grabbed me, says, "You're good." He drags me out, and that's when the other officers came and proceeded to do their work on him. And but he was deceased eventually.